want to thank everyone. As you know, I'm passionate about this stuff. I love the business of what we do, and I also like to teach it. So I am grateful to Equa Marketing for hosting this free podcast, and I'm flattered that people are listening to it. Each episode is getting upwards of 500 listeners, which is pretty neat because we just started this a few months ago. So last month I spoke about what I call the leadership imperative. And the reason why I call it the imperative is that you can have everything else in place. And if you're a crappy leader, you're going to have all kinds of turmoil in your business, and you're certainly not going to, the profitability is not going to be there. So that was one of the most important things to talk about is leadership. And we also had a drawing for whoever was on the call or listened to the podcast from beginning to end and left a comment. And that was for 1 hour to, pick my brain, whatever you want to call it, coach, for things that may be on their mind, things that they're, business ventures, things you're trying to do. Should I leave the university? Should I buy a cool sculpting machine? And Dr. Brooke Walls won that. And I see Dr. Walls is on the call. So we will have to arrange a time so you and I can chat for an hour. And we're going to do more of these drawings in the future because people really want to kind of pick my brain. And I got to tell you, I probably get 3 to 5 communications a week, texts or emails from friends of mine or attempts saying, hey, I got this one thing I want to run by you. Do you have a few minutes? And of course, it's never 5 or 10 or 15 minutes. And one of my friends, Steve Mobley, asked a question this past week about injectors, he had a question, and we're going to answer that question. So I actually turned around the order of the podcast. So today, which will be how do I leverage myself with extenders, nurse injectors, and do it effectively? And that's going to be today's topic. So because I've had so many comments about that, everything from compensation right on through to, how do you build retention, things like restrictive coverage. So we're going to cover all that today. Any questions today more than ever as we get down toward the end of the hour? Looking for questions because this is a really hot topic. If there's one thing that I get asked at our national meetings on a very regular, because there are so many challenges and problems. So what I want to start out really talking about is, where I'm at. I never will give advice, but I'm going to tell you what I learned. And those who know me know that I try to make a science out of business because we're science people. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. If you feel like there's value here, please share it with your friends. You can actually, I think you can subscribe. The Aesthetic Water Cooler set up at this point now. I have my own series so that it's easier to find me. If you Google me and you should be able to find. If you have any problems at all, email us and let us know. So my story right now is that we have 3 registered nurses that are injectors. 2 are full-time, 1's part-time. We have a nurse practitioner who is part-time. We have a full-time MD, full-time facial plastic surgeon, and a part-time facial plastic surgeon who also works in the practice and does surgery. And then our facial plastic also works in our Rejuva Center. So my it's a separate space, and we run it as a separate business model. I started really handing off the non-surgical around the time frame of 2002 or 3, and since right around time frame of 2003, I started to do a lot with volume and fat grafting, and so I have tons and tons of experience with this. But my injection story is kind of like this. I got to a point where I was so busy and really, running from consult room down to inject someone with Botox. This is on my non-surgical day. And it got to a point where I didn't enjoy the non-surgical much at all. So I started to think, a lot of business and personal development. And one of the things they teach you is to find the things that there are things you're not good at and you don't like. Get rid of those, obviously. But there are things that you're good at and you don't necessarily like, and you have to decide, just because you're generating revenue, is this something I'm going to continue to do or not? And I decided I didn't love injecting patients. I mean, I would rather take off, even though it's not as profitable, I would rather do an excision of a skin cancer with a local flap than inject a patient. And that's, again, on the insurance side, I would rather do that and have somebody else injecting the patient and, obviously do facelifts and rhinoplasties, but I would rather do that than be running around injecting patients. So I started thinking, how am I going to do this? How am I going to, because we talked about this in one of the episodes about leverage and performance, right? We are so used to, as performers, trying to become the most efficient performers possible. But in the business world, they all talk about how do you leverage yourself, right? How do you leverage yourself so that you're generating revenue while you're doing other things? And for me, if I want to spend my time doing facelifts and rhinoplasty or facial rejuvenation and rhinoplasty, which are really what I do pretty much now surgically, you have got to get some of these things off your plate. I didn't feel like I was giving up knowledge base because I still did a lot with the way of fat grafting, which probably 70 to 80% of our facial rejuvenation patients are getting, somewhere in that order. But I really wanted to give up some of the injectables, and I got a lot of pushback from my team initially, because what I did is I'm one of the nurses who's been with us. Now, she's been with us for 15 years. We have another nurse who's been with us for about 5 years. Our nurse practitioner has been with us for about 12 years. So we have a lot of longevity. I mean, because I hear this from my colleagues about all this turnover. So we're doing something right. But I trained a nurse, a registered nurse, and I'm going to talk to you about how do you select the right people. I trained someone to do this, and just from a results point of view, let's fast forward 15 years now. What we're doing is working. We have healthy turnover, which means we don't have a lot. And I'm going to get into what that means. We have an amazing team. The culture and the morale is good, and we're in the top 1% in the country as far as when Allergan looks at their metrics. So we're doing the but I remember at the time, getting a lot of pushback from my team saying, well, what are we going to do? Because Mrs. Smith only wants you. Right? And they're going to hear from people, because I hear it all the time. They say, people tell me at the meetings, oh, I know you don't inject patients. My patients will only work. They only want me. So there are pluses and minuses of that, but if you're that person doing all the injection and you are more surgical based, you are not going to have the time to do those type of things. So the first thing that's important to do, look at, state to state regulations are different in every state. And if you want to talk about the wild, wild west, the injectable area is that, and it's the same thing with the laser market. Let me just give you an example. In the state of New York, an LPN can run a removal laser. Okay, they're not, and yet there are other states where an esthetician can run hair removal laser in your practice. In New York State considers there's the Department of Education, and estheticians fall under that. They can run a hair removal laser in their own facility because it falls under their jurisdiction. But if an esthetician works for you in the state of New York, the state of New York, the Department of Health does not recognize an esthetician as a healthcare provider. So if they are working for you, you might as well have the secretary be running that laser hair removal. So it's imperative that you first at what degrees can do what in your state. Now, in the state of New York, a registered nurse under the direction of a physician with standing orders, if the patient has been evaluated and seen, a registered nurse can inject patients. And so, as we know, there are different degrees. You've got an LPN, an MD, a PA, and an RN. And I'm going to tell you my experience on this. Again, the pitfall mindset physician is that my patients want me. And there's another pitfall mindset physicians have, especially I believe, surgeons will say, I have a problem, meaning I want a nurse injector. And how do I solve that problem in the most quickly, the most efficient manner possible? We interview a few people. They seem like they're skilled. They seem like they're nice. We hire them. And then 6 months later, we have a failure with them. And that is very different when I talk about building a high performance team. The way you do it is hire slowly and fire quickly. So the different mindset is, as a physician, is how do I turn this into a business to leverage my time, right? So that I'm creating a business and not just a job. And we talked about that when we talked about, multiple profit centers. If you just work in the business and you can, because I've talked to other docs and they say, well, I don't want to give up that revenue. I can keep that revenue to myself, if I'm doing fillers and whatever. My mindset is, I'm not trying to create a lifestyle business, something I'm going to live off of. What I want to do is I want a growth business. How do I continue to grow the bottom line? How do I continue to grow my gross? How do I continue to grow my net? Way to do that, and this is my formula, if there's something that somebody can do 80% as well as I can do it, it's time to hand it off. It may not be doing the deep plane facelift, but let's talk about Botox. Let's talk about fillers, And so up until about 2010, 9 or 10, the last thing that I injected from 2006 until 2010 was Sculptra, because I felt that had a learning curve. And I don't want to say didn't trust the nurses, but I didn't want them to take on that responsibility, take on the potential liability of Sculptra. And I had tons of experience with fillers, so I would continue to do that. So when my staff would come to me and say, Dr. Williams, what do I say when Mrs. Smith says, well, Dr. Williams always injects my Botox? And I said to her, I remember Marianne, my patient care coordinator, came to me and I said, Marianne, tell her that Dr. Williams just doesn't do that anymore. And, over the next couple of years, I may have lost a couple of people, but what we've gained in growth far exceeded what we lost. And so, quite frankly, if it's done correctly, if you have a surgical practice, you're continuing to grow and grow and grow your primary care network, right? So that now when I see a patient like I did the other day, I haven't seen in years, because that patient has been in our Rejuva Center getting their non-surgical. You say, well, what are you here for? And I'm ready for my facelift. I mean, I've been able to keep those patients in my fold. Now, I have a number of folks who will send me patients. I mean, even local dermatologists who send me. I always make sure, and we have a system I always make sure I send those people back to dermatologists. And I think that's critical that we do, because I don't want to, that to me is a valuable relationship. They're kind enough to send me a patient, and I send those back. But other than the ones that are in my fold, it allows us to continue to grow that patient base in a way that I couldn't do. And quite frankly, I think that my team in our Rejuva Center does a much better job spending time with patients than I do. And quite frankly, I think that their care can be better than a doctor running in and out of the room that's distracted, the consult down the way, and the patient isn't completely anesthetized. So, what are the common problems? Well, one of them that we have with nurses and nurse practitioners is turnover, leaving to the competition, and entitlement. And I'm not, I have an amazing team with a lot of longevity, but this is what I'm hearing from my colleagues. I don't know how you do it. There must be something different in the water that you have in Albany, New York, because I can't keep good people. Just by the time I get up to speed, they go across town to the competition. So, turnover, bad fit. If we feel someone is not a good fit, we let them go. We don't try to hang on to them because they're going to be a problem somewhere else. So now how do you deal with this? Well, if you read, and again, I always give a lot of homework out, the New Gold Standard, which is the Ritz-Carlton, the book Ritz-Carlton Does What It Does, by Joseph Michelli is his name. The fourth chapter in that book is a select, don't hire. And we are obsessed with hiring the people that we hire. Jack Welch, used to say, slow to hire, quick to fire. Slow to hire. I mean, it's not unusual for us to date someone, all kidding aside, for 6 months before we hire them. It's not, we do not invest the training and all of that goes into bringing someone on and making sure they're a good fit and part of our culture, and don't start to, quote, develop some entitlement. We want to make sure that that's not a problem before we invest a lot of time and energy into them. And Jack Welch used to say, you should have about 10% turnover. If you're having a lot of turnover, that's unhealthy. And if you're not having enough turnover, that's unhealthy, because if you're not having enough turnover, you're not having the difficult conversations. There's a methodology that we subscribe to called top grading. And the author of that is Jeffrey Smart. We have put all those tools together, and we follow this like a book when we hire. And it's not just for nurse injectors, it's for everyone that we bring into our practice that we could, quote, select. And that is a different process. Again, most surgeons, most doctors, I got a problem, I want to get it done, I want someone. And they suffer from what we call hiringitis. They make a bad choice on who they hire. And this is where I think a lot of us fail. It's not that there aren't good people in your market, it's that we're in too big of a hurry based on the sales pitch that we get from the person that we meet for a half hour. They come from a good family, a nice part of town, they know a lot of people, so we start to kind of get sucked into that. We are optimists, so we want to bring on that person that we think is going to be the best. And in reality, 6 months later, we get something different. So I don't want to get totally into top grading right now, because it's a whole process, but I'm telling you, it works. It has to do with the initial phone interview. And then it goes, and then it's, all the references that you check. And when you check these references, you're not asking them, are they a good person? You're saying things like, we all have struggles and things that we're not really great at. When you worked with Mr. Smith back then, what were their challenges? You see, it's a very non-threatening way to say what's their weakness, right? When you worked with them back then and you give them an out, but really following this top grading technique, and we do this for anyone that we hire, including the registered nurses. In Jeff Smart's book on top grading, they talk about getting 90%, 95% chance of getting, an A player versus a CC plus player, C or C plus player. And to me, this is really where we as physicians fail, is on the hiring process, because we're busy, we're in the operating room, we're running, and we have a problem, we fill it. Again, the Ritz-Carlton, fourth chapter in the book, select, don't hire. It's the same concept. Be obsessed with the people that you're bringing on board. So I'll give you a couple like bad hires that we had that were nurse injectors. And I'm going to give you some pearls out of this too. First one, we had, and I will tell you, I don't care whether it's an MD, whether it's a nurse practitioner, whether it's an LPN. I don't care what initials go after their name. It's not that one category is better than the other. I tend to find, these are generalizations, and I very much apologize if somebody's going to accuse me of being a stereotype here, but I think nurse practitioners in general are trained to be independent and work in pediatric practices and family medicine practices. We find that culturally, they register nurses, we have a relationship where they are not afraid to roll up their sleeves and get get dirty. We find, and maybe this is the Albany market, nurse practitioners are tougher because they're used to getting paid very well, and they want to be treated equally, and so we, even though there is not one category that works better than the other, That's just a generalization that we find. We had one, nurse practitioner, and I don't know that it necessarily mattered that she was a nurse practitioner, but she was a prima donna. Didn't want to wipe the counters after herself. Didn't want to, and how do you deal with the nurse practitioner, or that is a real prima donna and is, well, there's a couple ways. Again, you've got to diversify. You get other people there, and then the second thing is when you have someone that's not quite working out, you cut down their hours, and what'll happen is many times they eliminate themselves. And if they're not the right fit, they're not the right cultural fit to begin with, because I taught them this stuff, and then they're going to go across town. So, that's how we deal with it. We start to cut their hours. We back them off. We had one that was with us for about 3 years, a registered nurse. And here's the bummer. She was really good at it. She was really good at injecting. She was not afraid of injecting, because sometimes you'll get us, it's just too timid. Registered nurse is too timid, but here's the problem. And this goes into our selection criteria. She wasn't passionate about it. It's hard to, quote, sell what you are not passionate about. And after about 3 years, and we were sick over it, she was part of our culture. She was good. She came to us and said, I just need to go back to the emergency room because I don't love this. That was another wrong hire we made. We had one that was with us for about 6-7 years, a registered nurse, and she was very, very good. Unbeknownst to us, I think she always had a little bit of a functional drinking problem. But after 6-7 years, she went through some stuff in her life. But I had a couple patients telling me that, what did they say? One patient said to me, after she takes care of me, I feel like I need to go have a drink myself, because she was spilling all her problems on them. And you'll find people who have substance issues, they have a little bit of erratic behavior. And so, that was a wrong hire. We, unbeknownst to us, I think it was kind of an insidious problem that crept up over a period of years. We did the right thing. We took her out. Actually, I think the straw that broke was back. The patient told me there's no alcohol on her. And I was like, that's it. Now this is bad stuff. We documented all this, and we, got the right help for her. And ultimately she came back, she worked for a month or so, and then we terminated her. And, I want to talk about that for a minute, because people are always worried about, workers, about unemployment and all that. If you have someone that is not working out for you, there are some things you can do. Probably the best thing you can do is meet with them on a regular basis, hold them accountable on a regular basis, and a lot of people will eliminate themselves. But I am not held hostage to someone. If someone's not working out, we get rid of them. So the criteria that we use now for hiring, that's going to give us the best shot once we've top rated them, okay? And again, that may take 6 months to do, is they have got to be passionate about our industry, number one. Because they're the one person we had that was with us for a few years. We spent all this time getting them trained, and then they go, they decided that, they want to go back to the hospital. So we have to be convinced that they're passionate about our industry, number one. Number two, they got to be caring. Now, and they've got to be motivated and self-starter. So to me, that's part of our culture, right? I don't want to be, babysitting someone. They've got to be a self-starter. They can't be a prima donna. And they got to be motivated and self-starter. So that's a cultural issue. And then technical criteria we want people who have been there. I call it, they've saved lives before. They're done saving lives. It's like, the years that I did in all my reconstructive work and trauma, I'm over it. And sometimes you'll find, people when they get out, whether it's nurse anesthetists or whether it's, nurse injectors, they've kind of, they're in the hospital. They are the best people to hire because they've been there, they've done it. They're not feeling like I'm missing saving lives. After all those years doing what I did, I kind of got burned out on it, and I'm over it. And it's the same thing. What we found, some of the best nurses to hire are previous or former ICU or CCU nurses. And so that really bodes well as far as the selection process. So I'm going to talk about how do you build this team? How do you build a team? Um, and then I'm going to talk about, the non-compete and how do you pay them and how do you handle some of the challenges we've had over the years in the next half hour or so. Anyone who knows me, I am not a spectator sport enthusiast. I don't watch a lot of sports. We watch some college basketball and we watch some college football, but I am not a big sports enthusiast, but I am a big fan of team sports growing up. And the reason why is because of all the life lessons that come out of it. I have 4 kids. My wife and I never kidded ourselves that our kids were going to be the next whatever in whatever they do. But we are really big advocates and fans of team sports because you learn how important it is to work on a team and to be part of a team and not to become indispensable. The basketball, the athlete who is a star player, if they don't get the team thing, they devalue. They get paid less because they don't understand. You can't. I had a coach say to me once, I can win games with 3 star players, but I don't win championships. I need all 5 people that are star players and get the team thing. You learn how to win. You learn how to lose. You learn how to be humble. You learn how to lose and come back. All of these things. And so, part of that is part of our culture, right? And when we're hiring, we're looking for this, have they played team sports? So I'm a big fan of that. That's certainly a check in the plus column. The other thing we do is we put a lot of training and we go very slowly. Now, let me just tell you a little bit about training, which I think is imperative. The Ritz-Carlton does it. A lot of really successful businesses do it. They put so much time in training. We put a lot of time in cross-training and training. Now, let's reference a very successful company, General Electric, right? I've read Jack Welch's books, Winning and Straight from the Gut. And what people used to say about GE, 50% of the company was GE Capital, but he was criticized for years. I mean, what is GE's number one product for most of these years? It's people development, human resources. They were the stars. And if you looked around, during his tenure, many people that left GE went on to become very successful CEOs in other companies because of his Crotonville facility and all the training that they put into their people. And what Jack Welch used to say is train them like they're going to stay forever and treat them so that they do. And I never forgot that. And that's what we try to do. Now, here's the pearl. Train them very, very slowly. Now, why am I saying that? Train them slowly. Okay, here's the typical failure that I see with our colleagues. I'm going to hire someone and I need to get them up to speed. They get them up to speed with Botox. They get them up to speed with lasers. They get them up to speed with a lot of things quickly. And all of a sudden, they start to see some of the entitlement wave coming out. The minute we get a whiff of entitlement, we get rid of them because it's not going to go away, folks. It never does. When all of a sudden we have someone, well, do you know how much, last month I did $10,000. No, we did $10,000 as a team. You see the difference? And so why do you train slowly? Because here's the pearl. We use this period of training to determine if they're part of our culture. Because not only am I not going to waste our resources on training them, okay, I'm not going to train them to go across town and compete with me. I want to train very slowly. We may train them. We no longer do laser hair removal because I determined it's not a profit center and we just got rid of our machines about 5 years ago. But let's use this as an example. We bring on a registered nurse. We think they got the potential. We top graded the hell out of them. We dated them for 6 months and we're like, you know what? This is a keeper. So we bring them on and we train them on laser hair removal. And we make them the laser hair removal skank for 6 months, right? And we watch and pay attention. Do they have to have the every new shiny object? do they start, show signs of entitlement? We also train them on our processes and our business processes. Because if we're not going to keep them long-term, why invest all this? Doesn't mean that we don't train them on, we don't want to train them on the technical things that are proprietary. That makes sense, right? So, and the old way of see, do, teach, which is what we learned in medical school, we don't do that. We have a whole training manual that we've put together over years. We had one of our registered nurses who's still with us, was our basically education. She was the education liaison. She worked with me on putting together a whole training manual, training module with post-tests and documentation. We had the misfortune of having the Department of Health come pay us a visit once. Once they saw this stuff, they backed right off. I don't even know what happened or why. I think it was a single use thing that brought them in. Remember that? People were talking about, Botox was going to be single use and you had to throw it out after a while. So we go very slowly with them, and we don't get them totally trained up on all the technical things until we determine if they're part of our culture, if they're going to fit. The other part of what we do to build our team is constant communication, what I call coaching. So there's a book called Masterful Coaching by Robert Hargrave, which is the template that I use. And we have this, this is the template we follow. We've modified it to our aesthetic practice, so it works very, very well. And as far as coaching and team building, I don't like what's called evaluations because I think they have a negative connotation, and we don't do them at the end of the year. We do what we call biannual coaching. And when I meet with our managers, and I just had a managers meeting, one of the questions I have and in my agenda is, who did you coach last month? And how did it go? And tell me, what was Susan's frustration? Again, I have a whole format we follow, but we do this coaching because it allows us to communicate with people. And so here's the format that I follow when our managers follow when they coach. And this is no different whether it's the rank and file, someone answering the phone, or it's no different than you're talking about a rock star registered nurse. 4 steps. 1, you invest in the relationship. And what that means is people know you care about them when you invest in the relationship. Let me show you how that goes. Linda, we're getting together because we want to help you get to the next level. Okay. And the way we're going to help you get to the next level is because then you're more valuable to yourself. You're more valuable to us. Your compensation is better, all of that type of thing. But the way we do this is, we want to be honest with you. And we want you to be honest with us because we want you to help us with things that we're falling short on our business. First thing I want to do, listen, we all have things that we're good at, and we all have things that we could do a little better job. But let's talk about the stuff that you've done. We think you are your strengths. And of course, we know what they are, and we talk to them about them. And of course, anyone who's in that position, when you're having constant communication, people, it's not an unfamiliar topic, right? They know what their strengths are. Part of the acceptance is that we also need to talk about things that you're struggling with a little bit, or maybe could do better with, and you have that conversation. And it might be, how do you think it makes Jane feel when you're constantly talking about how much you did last month? Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's important. We think that you could do a little better job, being part of the team. And then we talk about, let's set some goals for the next time we get together. Now, if you've got someone like Rose who's been with us for 20 years and who's amazing, you're getting together with her every 6 months. You don't have to have a checkup date in a month or 2. But if you have someone who's coming up a little short and needs coaching, you meet with them and you set a date on the calendar. And then you ask them, what are your biggest frustrations, Linda? And this is part of the coaching session, right? The 4th step. What are your frustrations? If this were your business, what would you do? How do you think we could generate more money? Where are we leaving money on the table? And then, again, you set some goals and you go forward. But we think it's very important to communicate at least twice a year. We find in a medical practice 4 times a year is too much. Once a year is not enough to coach. And we don't like to do it at the end of the year because there's just too much angst over it. If we do it ongoing, and the system that we use is we coach them the anniversary date of their hire. So if it's April, every year they get April, and then June, July, August, September, October, November. So every April, every November, they get together. And then when I meet with my managers, I'm asking them, who did you coach last month? And I did that. And they said, who else? And they said, well, no one else is up this month. So we got, so this way you're getting this communication going up and down, back and forward. And if Linda is frustrated because the Botox counts aren't correct or whatever it is, you're going to hear this from your nurse. So 70% of people leave a job over frustration. Why do you want to lose a good registered nurse that you put all kinds of time into? Because they're frustrated. And if you're asking this question on a regular basis, and we're going to talk about building a team and huddles and meeting cycles at another podcast, but if you're asking them twice a year in a closed room, and again, I think these meetings typically should be about 90 minutes. If you're asking them on a very regular basis, that question, and they're saying nothing, I'm not frustrated over anything. It's hard for them to quit their job and say, well, it's happening every day and it makes me crazy. So I want to get into compensation here because this is the hot topic, and I'm going to shout out here to my buddy Steve Mobley, who asked me in a DM this past week, hey, I have a nurse who wants to clock in when she's charting. And I didn't exactly know what he meant by that, but it has to do with compensation, right? And I'll tell you what we do and what works well and what fosters longevity with your team. I'm not saying this is right, but I have some strong opinions about it. Now, I believe what we want is we want our people to be well compensated compared to the competition, right? So we believe that they should have a strong base salary that is, with all the benefits. And I'm not going to get into that whole thing right now. Our staff has a lot of benefits, between the retirement plan and time off and all that other stuff. But at least fair market plus rate of what they're compensated. And they do get, we have on our product scales, our entire team split some of the bonus money there, and they get the same thing as everybody else. Okay. The registered nurses are, they know at the end of the year that we have a formula. There's a small percentage, and I would probably say 5 to 8% of their comp at the end, it comes in the end of the year in a bonus. And when they get a bonus check of $9,278, they know that it's tied somehow to their performance and profitability. I am a firm believer in not paying percentages. And I'll tell you why. First of all, it undermines the effectiveness of the team. If you've got someone that's just getting paid a percentage on your team, who's a nurse, how do you think the front desk people feel when they go out of their way to fit Sue Smith in, and they know, and especially if that person's got entitlement issues, and they're carrying on about how much they did last month or how much they did this week. The other problem with it is that it's in many states. If you look up misconduct in the state office, medical misconduct in the state of New York, it will say revenue sharing with a non-physician. Now, what does that mean? If you have a huge base salary, 90%, 95% is base, and they have a performance model there, no one's going to consider that misconduct. But if you're fee splitting, a percentage of what they generate is going to them. If you think malpractice is miserable, you don't want the Office of Medical Misconduct in your office. I have had colleagues of mine, because it's not covered by any insurance you have. So I've had colleagues of mine spend upwards of 6 figures to defend a medical misconduct case. And you are guilty until proven innocent by medical misconduct. Look up if you're a surgeon, look up the American College of Surgeons Code of Ethics. What's considered unethical? Revenue sharing with a non-physician. Okay. It's in almost every society that's considered. Now, so how do you justify it? What I hear from my colleagues is that's what everybody does in my town. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. And they say, well, I won't get good people if I don't give them a percentage. You don't have the right people then, and we have built a very, very successful team based on doing this the right way. It fosters a team mentality. People know that they're getting something more for hustling and adding to the bottom line, but it's not a fee splitting arrangement. Now, That's different with MDs. Physicians, you can pay a physician a percentage, and what's fair market value. If you have an MD, that's on a kind of a partnership track, and I'm just telling you what I've been told by the consultants, somewhere around 20% of what they generate is fair for someone who you would consider partnership person. 15% or so is fair on gross, not on net. I have colleagues of mine say, well, I pay 30 or 35% on net. I'm like, you couldn't, what it costs there's a cost to accounting. You know how hard that is to account for your net? So across the board, the easiest and least costly and least confusing is a percentage of gross. But I would discourage paying nurses and nurse practitioners on that. So if I get back to Steve Mobley's question on, one of my nurses wants to get paid while she clocks in, I assume that, I don't know what that means. Does that mean that Steve is paying them, and he's in Utah, does that mean he's paying them on a percentage, and then they also want to get time, when they're clocked in? I'm encouraging people to really get away from that model. Now, I'm going to tell you that it's not necessarily what the consultants tell you, okay? But I'm going to tell you the consultants haven't walked the walk. They don't, there's in some of the best practices, but the consultants, especially the consultants that represent the companies, honestly, they don't give a damn about your turnover. They want to push the bottom line out the door. And I have found that it is very dysfunctional. And I have found time and time again, the consultants that come from the companies, especially the business development people, again, nice folks. I understand they got a job, but their job is not to run your business. And they will tell you things that push revenue and push product and are not necessarily in the best interest of you building a high performance team. So I think that's important, and we'll talk about, patient care coordinators in another podcast, because I am so against the whole, fee splitting thing, not because it doesn't work from time to time, but because it creates more turnover, more entitlement, and undermines the team thing. So that's my opinion. And I can only tell you, we have had people with us for years. We have a great morale here. When Allergan came in and measured how our staff rate us, we're in the top 1% of the country as far as management goes. So, we're doing a few things right. And as compared to a number of my colleagues where I hear they have all kinds of turnover, they just get someone trained a year later and they move and they take all their people with them. So let's talk about non-competes, because that's another hot topic and things that I get asked all the time, restrictive covenants. Now, first of all, I've done a lot of research on this, and we have a restrictive covenant with our nurses. And our doctors, actually, including myself, signed a restrictive covenant. And the reason why is, say I got offered a big offer to leave this practice and I brought partners in, it could devalue the company, the LLC. It could take away and it's the same thing, with nurses and nurse practitioners. Now, I think you have to look at first of all, know your state laws, because every state's different. For example, attorneys don't have a non-compete in the state of New York. It doesn't exist. So it is up to interpretation to the different states and how this goes. But in the state of New York, you can legitimately have a non-compete. It also can be looked at differently by different judges. It depends on whether they're more liberal or more conservative leaning. So I have talked to attorneys about this and come to the conclusions that I'm going to share with you our experience. A non-compete or a restrictive covenant will work if it's one, fair in distance and fair in duration. You can't just say you can't practice medicine for the rest of your life, right? That doesn't make sense. But if you say, listen, I'm going to bring you in, nurse, and I'm going to give you all this training, and I'm going to build a website and put you on there. If you leave, it's creating damages to us. There's a value to that. So what we use and is fair and is reasonable is 20 or 30 miles in 2 or 3 years. I think that's reasonable because it can affect your business. And in that, they have to acknowledge that, if they take people, they acknowledge there's damages. They'll try to solicit your staff, try to solicit the patients that are basically, they are property of the practice. The patients charged the patient's names. And we had a patient care coordinator who took a bunch of names, and we sued her and we shut her down, because what she was doing is she took a lot of, she was liking people on Facebook, and she moved to another plastic surgeon's office. And she signed a non-compete when she came here about things that were proprietary information. So it has to do with the language that's in there. And the other thing is damage clause. They have to acknowledge, because it protects you. Why does it protect you by giving them a damage clause? Okay, one of our nurses, let's see, one of the doctors decides they're going to go across town. They've got a house in the area and they've got children in school. A judge may look at that and say, well, you can't prevent them from practicing their craft, even though you've given them all this training, right? They have a family to feed. But if you give them an out, which means I acknowledge that this will be a hardship for the business, and I acknowledge upon signing this, that value is about $100,000. Now, I don't know what we use for our nurses right now. I can't remember. It's probably 50 or 100. But I acknowledge it's a hardship to the business. And I acknowledge that I can practice anywhere outside the 20-mile or 2-year thing. It's going to have teeth in most states, because you are saying, no, I'm not telling you you can't do this. You're just saying, I'm giving you an out that acknowledges that there's a damage there. So, and we've had a couple nurses who have left us, and they go, they have never challenged it, because who wants to get into, getting a lawsuit and discovery? I mean, let's face it, you can burn through 50 grand in no time. So that's been our experience with, we do have a non-compete in place. And again, I would encourage you to take those criteria, the non-compete, take the, the damage clause, the distance, the duration, find a healthcare attorney in your state and run all this by, because it is different from state to state. So let's talk a little bit about how do we handle, and I'm going to talk about some of the challenges we've had. Hey, does anyone have any burning questions right now? Because, if you want, you can shoot them on Delilah and she'll get them to me, based on what I've said. I'm going to do some what I call experience sharing right now. I'm going to talk about, some of the challenges we've had over the years, and go through them one by one with a few examples and how I solved those problems. Let's see.
Dr.
Here we
Williams,
go.
there was a request for the coaching book you mentioned.
Yes, it's called, I'll tell you what, it's painful to read, folks. It's called Masterful Coaching by Robert Hargrave. Masterful Coaching. About halfway through the book, you'll get kind of the 5-step system. That's what I follow. And I got to tell you, it's changed our business. So that's the name of the book, Masterful Coaching. So kind of getting back to the team thing and why we feel that it's not giving a performance model necessarily, or giving a performance model with some performance, a very small part of it, but not having a fee split, aside from the ethical stuff, is that the team, meaning our entire team, shares some of the profitability of the skincare products and the businesses throughout. And it allows us, between coaching and the team building stuff, to build a cohesive team, which encourages the people at the front desk to want to get that patient in, because they know it helps, everybody in the bottom line. Okay, so let's talk about some of the challenges and failures and struggles. One, the indispensable. How do you deal? And I've got about 5 minutes, so I'm going to rip through these pretty quickly. How do you deal with the indispensable employee? This happens whether it's a bookkeeper or whether it's an MD. You start cross-training, and you make all of your stuff proprietary to the business and not necessarily the registered nurse or the doctor. I'll give an example. A lot of people come in and they want to see the same people for their fillers and their Botox. But if someone wants to get in and needs some Botox and Dr. X or RN X is tied up for 3 weeks, we offer them one of the other providers so they get the whole experience. We do not want to create an indispensable employee. It's the same thing with when we have a bookkeeper. So the same thing, I guess, whether it's our registered nurses, our doctors, or our bookkeepers, we want to do a lot of cross training and make everything proprietary to the center of the business, not necessarily the individual. Number two, someone's not part of our culture and don't get the team thing. If they're there within in the first 6 months, we either start to power down their hours, cut them back, keep the communication going, and we have no problem letting them go. So someone's not part of your culture, get rid of them. We have that nurses and can be doctors. They're giving people, right? So they want to give things away to the patients. Well, I'll give you a few little extra Botox. Part of that comes down to communication. When they see their year-end bonuses and they know that number is in there and it affects the profitability, and we talk to them about that and their coaching and evaluation. And we also started doing this several years ago, making sure they have an assistant to help them. It makes the registered nurse spend less time with the patient, and there's a lot less of the giving. I know that kind of sounds crazy, and because they have another witness in the room, right? So, and it makes them much more efficient, and they're much less likely to build how do I say this? I mean, I spend a lot less time with patients and with the nurses where there's a little bit more of a spa atmosphere, and they hear their problems and they have that kind of relationship that, maybe not ideal for a business, but it's a great relationship because and there's a fine balance between holding on to that. So, you don't want your nurse practitioners giving too much away, because you're still there to run a business. And by communication and them knowing that affects the bottom line of the business and their bottom line, they're less likely to do it. I talked about, the challenge we've had with nurses and nurse practitioners or extenders, providers that form too tight of a relationship with the patient. Again, we provide an assistant in the room so that they're in there less time, and it makes them more efficient. And once they know that they're becoming more productive and they're making more money, they will less likely resist this. Because what you don't want is that, because if that person does leave, they're much more likely to pull and take people with them if they've not experienced your whole center and worked with other people. Acting independently. We had a nurse many years ago that was doing things that, how do I say it, we have standing orders for every single thing. They were using a laser for, hyperpigmentation in areas that they shouldn't, and they ended up, the fluence was high, and they ended up with a number of first-degree burns on it. It was not part of the protocol. And now, what I tell, again, in the coaching each year, we tell people, listen, if you go outside the standing orders, you're flying on your own. We have a separate malpractice premium and policy for these individuals. And we communicate, and they acknowledge, sign a form at the end of the year that says, I acknowledge that I'm to follow the orders. If I go outside the orders of protocol, I'm basically acting independently, which is basically practicing medicine, right, without a license. I think it's important to have that. And when you have them, re-signed each year, to have that, because that's what protected me, thank God, because that could have fallen back on me. Loyalty or lack thereof, ongoing training, as I mentioned earlier, building part of something bigger than themselves, building part of a team, and then good compensation. People knowing that they're getting treated well, they're much less likely to move ship. We got a couple minutes left here. What I call batting at shiny objects. I have many times, they'll have a nurse, or not just a nurse, or doctor, who comes and says, you know what, we really need to do this, we really need to do this. And you and I both know, vetting it doesn't make good business sense on paper, but they feel, whether it's a new skin tightening device or a new laser or a new whatever. And then, in reality, our experience is, buy the damn thing and no one's using it, So, how do we do that? We really research the hell out of technology before we take it on. We've had people who had to have a certain chair, 6, 7, and I call it like, okay, if they're generating this kind of, you gotta let them, you gotta give in now and then, but $6,000-$7,000 chair, and they use it for 2 months and they don't like it, that's annoying when you're writing the check. So we constantly are giving them an education. We're constantly vetting out and doing research and making sure something's not only efficacious, but it's profitable. before we bring it on. And it's hard because you get the indispensable registered nurse who's doing an amazing job, who just wants this technology. It's $50,000 technology. And I can give you example after example, but you get it, and they lose their enthusiasm over as them. One of my colleagues had a great strategy that he did, and I thought it was really cool. When he has a piece of technology that the team decided that we need to buy, and they've done the vetting, it didn't pan out, he puts it in the kitchen, and people have to trip over it and look at that damn thing until it's paid off. And I like that strategy. We haven't done that yet. And that's about it, folks. I think we're out of time. I encourage you to, first of all, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. Dr. Brooke Walls and I are going to get together. I'm going to spend some time with her and see if I can help her solve some of her problems or challenges. I'm so flattered that this podcast is really taken off. Each month it's growing. I think the people are going back and listening to the old episodes, and we're hitting at about 500 people per episode. Let us know questions that you have, things that you would like to hear more about, and we will try to incorporate them into the upcoming episodes. Again, please share it with your friends, and subscribe if you're so interested. Does anyone have any burning questions? I got a minute or so here before we sign off. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time listening to me.
We do have one question.
Okay.
What's the ideal breakdown of part-time versus full-time employees and the rationale for this?
Okay. In my early years, I used to like to have a lot of part-time people, and a lot of my colleagues will say, I just backfill with part-time because they're less expensive. I like to fill with as many full-time people as possible. And the reason why I always say full-time people, there's a reason why they give benefits, full-time benefits to full-time people, and they're worth it because their head is in the game. You have a lot more continuity when you have full-time people. I would say if I'm to choose a mix, we have a number of nurses that work in the surgical practice that are moms and do part-time, 20 hours, 25 hours. But I think in your ideal mix of your business, you probably want 75% or so full-time. That's my opinion. I'm big on having full-time people. It just, I find, like, for example, in the nursing, the people that I go to when I have a patient who's got a challenge or I go to the full-time people because I know they're always there. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I tend to, if you're trying to grow a business, then full-time people fit more. However, if someone's invaluable to you, it's worth working it out. Let me give an example. We have Rose, who's been with us for over 20 years. She time. I knew her rock star, but when she was in her, child raising years, we had her as part-time because she was a keeper. She's part of our culture, and we want to make it work for her. But and then ultimately we brought her back as full-time. But if you want to try to grow a business, you want most profitability, try to keep as many full-time people as you can. So I hope that answers your question. I think that hiring stacked with all part-time people is just cheaping out and doesn't build a good business, because ultimately what you want is the business to run itself when you're not there. All right. So I'm going to sign off from now. Anything else I need for housekeeping? Next upcoming episode, I'm going to talk about how to, effective strategic planning, how to exponentially grow your business.